This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Technology for getting possessed. That will be one of the subjects that we cover on this week's View from the Bunker. Welcome. I am Derek Gilbert. Joining me for our monthly roundtable discussion, Iron and Myth. This is episode number 25. Sadly, we are a man down this week as Brian Godawa is taking care of a family situation, and we pray for Brian and his family as they deal with this. Nothing critical, we trust, but the Lord has all of that under control. So we will make do, just the three of us, as we soldier on. Joining me, the author of the song, the book, Giants, Sons of the Gods, now in its 10th anniversary, revised and expanded edition, and the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, Doug Van Dorn, and the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, author of books including his probably best-known interview with the Giant, Ethno-Historical Notes on the Nephilim, Dr. Judd Burton. Fellows, welcome. We got to the end of last month's discussion on portals and realized there were things left unsaid. We really hadn't touched on the use of technology and pharmaceuticals, Pharmakeia, to open gateways into the spirit realm. Doug, you want to tackle that one first? I mean, Pharmakeia is a Greek word that we see in the Book of Revelation in particular. How do we process this as Christians? I presume we're not talking about, and I say this as somebody who's on a couple of different prescription medications, we're not talking about medicine in general.
There might be a little bit more overlap to that than I think a lot of people think. Certainly, we get the word pharmacy from that word.
I can testify.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You know a little bit about that, Judd. That word, the Greek word, we obviously get pharmacy from it, and so pharmaceuticals come from that word, and it's a word that is quite related to the idea of sorcery, and so it definitely fits the idea of portals that we talked about last time, and that we'll probably take in a little bit of a different direction this time. And, I think at its best, if you were looking at, this is a whole nother rabbit trail, I suppose, but if you were looking at medicine, like preventative medicine or something like that, vitamins, minerals, things that you can do to help yourself stay healthy, that's not really what Pharmakeia is all about. But when dealing with medication that is man-made, manipulated. It's funny because I think even most of our medications that we get from a pharmacy is actually has roots in natural things, mushrooms, or whatever the case might be. It's just that they can't patent a vitamin D and make a ton of money on it, so they have to do something else with it, right? There's obviously certain kind of medications that I think come very close to Pharmakeia, especially if we're talking about pain medications or things that dull your mind, because when you think about certain types of hallucinogenic drugs or whatever, this to me is the definition of portals, of things that God has made that we can put into our system, ayahuasca, LSD, whatever the case might be, that you can go on a trip, you can start seeing entities and that kind of stuff. And I think that this was really kind of at the root of the meaning of the word Pharmakeia, because you're getting at a kind of a sorcery that is working somehow in some way or another with the spiritual, supernatural realm. And so yeah, I tend to think there's probably more of an overlap with Pharmakeia, pharmaceuticals than what a lot of us want to let on.
I mean, it is something that shows up and is clearly translated in Galatians 5:20 and Revelation 18:23, and then similar terms based on that root appear 3 other times in the book of Revelation, and every time it is connected to sorcery. There are some people, I think, who are a little concerned that anything that you would get from the pharmacy then would fall into that category. And I I don't think we can take it that far, but I think you're right. I think we start looking at ayahuasca and other mind-altering drugs, hallucinogenics. In particular, there's one I want to talk about in a minute called DMT, which is a molecule. It's a key component in ayahuasca, if I understand correctly, but it's certainly one that's gotten some notoriety. There was a doctor, Rick Strassman, who conducted experiments at I forget
University
if it was
of
New Mexico, New Mexico State, or maybe it was
University
University
of
New Mexico.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I interviewed him about it more than 13 years ago, back in 2010, after his book DMT, the Spirit Molecule, was published. But it is, I think that is a different animal altogether than somebody who's just taking like extra strength Tylenol, as I have been since I slipped in that ice storm about a week and a half ago and banged my elbow, landed hard on my left elbow. I think that's a little different. But Jed, you made reference to personal experience with Pharmakeia. You want to share with the class?
Sure. Well, I think sort of picking up where Doug left off, there's a definite trajectory that Pharmakeia has. It's oriented towards harm. It's oriented towards, if you look at the word, it's magical working, it's spellcraft, but it's generally in association with not always, but generally in association with the use of poisons or drugs, which sort of harkens back to the craft that the Watchers taught, these early humans. And a related word is the pharmakon, which is it could be human. A human sacrifice often was an animal sacrifice, but it was essentially the scapegoat in a Greek ritual. And these were names that were given to, think about Sparta, where they would, if they found a child that they deemed was weak or malformed or whatever, they would leave them to the elements, and this was a pharmakon. As for my own personal experience, the last couple of years, I've had a front row seat to the kind of meltdown in medicine, just in terms of its infrastructure, thoroughly compartmentalized and bureaucratized, a lot of the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing, that sort of thing. And so, in my estimation, this seems to be something that's infected, to use the word, if you'll pardon the pun, has infected not just the boots on the ground administration of medicine in a lot of cases, not universally, but certainly prevalent. So there's the pragmatic boots on the ground end of it, where it's prevalent and palpable, and then you have the spiritual and the cultural levels that the spirit of Pharmakeia seems to be impacting, certainly in America and in other parts of the world as well. And because of my own ordeal, for the last 18 plus months, it's as I say, the best way to describe it is that the spirit is palpable.
We thankfully we've had better experience with my mother, who is in a nursing home. She's going to be 87 here in just over 6 weeks. So, and she's still physically really healthy, and thankfully working at a facility where the carers, the nursing staff, are really conscientious. So, and my sister-in-law has worked for many years in memory care units at various facilities in the Midwest. So I can speak to some of the challenges they face, having heard it secondhand from her. But as you found out, that's not the case everywhere. And I'm looking at a translation now, the Pharmakeia translation, which is a modern English translation of the Book of Enoch, and it's pretty clear, at least it seems to me, in First Enoch 7, where the sin of the Watchers is described as teaching humanity sorcery and charms, and to reveal to them the cutting of roots and plants. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about, where we're basically doing this for the purpose of making potions?
So I don't know. That's such an interesting text, and I think you find it later in the 60s chapters in the chapter in 60s as well, which is part of a different one of the books of that compilation that makes up First Enoch, and it's a tough one because, like, I was just thinking that it's what's really the issue going on if if we were to go back to the Genesis 6 event and the way that Jude puts it, talking about these otherworldly beings that left their habitation and crossed over, right? And it seems to me that that's the thing that's really at the heart of it. It's a crossing over to get knowledge or to be part of the domain that God has not appointed for you, at least at this point in time in your existence. And so, to me, there's a difference. There's a fundamental difference between, some sort of a pain numbing a numbing medication to help you with pain versus something where you're deliberately taking it so that you can cross through a door so that you can have a conversation with some entity on the other side. Like, those are not of the same caliber. And I actually don't think that there's anything wrong with taking medication for pain. I mean, God gave us all kinds of plants and roots. And that's what makes that passage so interesting, because you also read in the same place that the Watchers taught us writing, and writing becomes this evil thing. But that's like, what do you make of that? Because the book of Enoch is written down. So is it saying that itself is evil? I don't think so. I think what the issue is that it's the Watchers that were doing this. They were the ones crossing over, teaching us these things. It's the crossing over itself that's the problem, not necessarily the things that they might have been teaching one way or the other. Though each one of those needs to be taken on its own merit, I think.
Yeah, it speaks
in the same way that.
Go ahead, Derek.
I was going to say it's similar to the argument over the possession of firearms. I mean, if you're using it to defend your family, that's one thing. If you're using it to carjack somebody, that's another thing entirely.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you're right, Doug. Maybe it's the fact that it was taught to humanity before we were deemed ready for that information, and then how it gets used.
Yeah, and certainly, how we use it is a perversion. Most of the time, not always.
Jed, we'll stay out of your way now. You clearly had something to say. We don't want to get in the way.
Really all I was going to say is I would echo both of those sentiments. It's largely about intentionality. The small dosage of a certain medicine can be curative, and likewise an overdose can be lethal. And so it's really all about the implementation. Like Doug's reference, to writing. These sorts of things, like even most tech, we're going to talk about technology tonight. A lot of technologies fall within this category as well. A chip in the brain might help somebody, who's been paralyzed their entire life walk for the first time, or see for the first time, or something like that. But it could also be easily weaponized. It's all about these divisions and intentionality.
Yeah, definitely want to talk about that. I had the opportunity to interview Annie Jacobson some time back, who is the author of a book called The Pentagon's Brain, about the purpose of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So there was some interesting stuff that came out of that. But Doug, we had the opportunity last spring to visit a megalithic site on the Golan Heights that and spend time with the archaeologist who's done the most recent excavation there, Dr. Michael Freakman, talking about Gilgal Rephaim, which he blew my mind with some of the things, because I read just about every paper that he's written on that location, but getting the opportunity to pick his brain there on site was even better, because there are things he told us that were not in his papers, or things that I maybe overlooked. But first of all, the fact that he thought that these concentric rings around the central core were for the purpose of circumambulating the center. in a ritual fashion, which is, very interesting given that it's within eyesight of Mount Hermon on a clear day. And to approach the summit of Mount Hermon, Sir Charles Warren found in 1869, you have to approach it in a circular fashion with the center of with the summit on your left. In other words, counterclockwise. The same way he believes the core of Gilgal Rephaim was circled based on ancient artwork. What do you tell us? Like 80% of prehistoric art depicts humans dancing. And typically when they're dancing, they're in profile that suggests that they're dancing in a counterclockwise fashion. So this is a very ancient practice. But even more surprising was that the central core of Gilgal Rephaim, which has a shaft, they opened a hole in it when they were excavating it back in 1990, and they never put the rocks back. So when you go into the center, there's still some light in there, but except on the summer solstice, back when it was constructed, by his estimation, around 3710 BC, it was pitch dark. So he believes that this site and others like it that have like a dark cavity were meant to emulate the netherworld, where a shaman would take some sort of substance, go into a trance state, and then go into this artificial netherworld for communication with the spirits, and specifically the spirits of the underworld. Well, so here you got something going back almost 6,000 years that seems to suggest that this idea of trying to commune with the spirit realm was a central part of the religion of the prehistoric world.
It certainly seems to be the case at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and even some of the outlying sites. This idea of patterns of circles and the underworld is not just ancient, it's prehistoric. With reference to, for instance, the cave art, but now we have any number of sites, particularly in Turkey, where you've got examples of either stylized or the people believed that built them literally believed that they were portals or entrances into the netherworld, that they were a way to contact. If you read the literature on Göbekli Tepe, even Klaus Schmidt and the other archaeologists who have worked there, have come to this conclusion. And they don't have a stake in the supernatural game like we do, but they have nonetheless concluded, based on the evidence they've recovered thus far, that this is the probable belief system that was at work. And so this is something that is not just prehistoric, but it probably lines up with the arrival of the Watchers, this prehistoric window that we're dealing with.
What's interesting
I
too
was
is
really
that
surprised when Dr. Freakman talked about that here you have a scholar, and maybe it's just my Western bias. I would have thought that he was some sort of an atheist and would never even consider crossing over with drugs or whatever. But here he was just very openly talking about the fact that he really believed that that's what not just the people at the Gilgal Rephaim did, but all over the ancient world. Mm-hmm. It was really a shock to my system to hear him talk about that.
And archaeology in Israel has found evidence. Well, and they found it at Göbekli Tepe too, Jed, with the evidence that there was a lot of beer that was consumed at these sites.
Right.
But also cannabis. I remember just a few years ago a story that came out about a site in Arad, which was one of the king of Arad was one of the first Canaanite kings who came out against Moses and the Israelites. So down in the Negev, they found an entrance to a site in the Beersheba Valley and evidence of cannabis use. Mm-hmm. So this would have been in probably the Iron Age, because they're calling it Judahite. So this would have been in the Iron Age, sometime after 1000 BC, more recently than 1000 BC. But again, going back to Göbekli Tepe, there you're talking, 10,000 BC, 9600 BC?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So is it called Beer Sheba for a reason?
Well, as you well know, beer means well, but I think I've known some Bears fans in my day from back in Chicago that would love to have a well filled with beer. Old style, it's the drink in Chicago. So what then is the process? I know that none of us this is an area of expertise for any of us, but why then this idea that altering consciousness through alcohol, cannabis, or some other substance like ayahuasca, DMT, magic mushrooms, whatever? Why is that seem to be effective in actually opening perception into the spirit realm?
Well, again, I don't know that I would put all those in the same category. You can drink a lot of wine and never have any kind of encounters with any other entity, but you can take just a tiny bit of certain hallucinogenics and you're there right away. So I don't know that the function or the purpose of each of those drugs is identical, and that you can kind of make a blanket statement about it. And I just say that because people have, if you make a blanket statement, then all of a sudden it can become, especially when you're talking about portals or whatever, become a damning of every single thing that there is out there, which is what we kind of started off with, right? And we're not interested in doing that, but we are interested in trying to understand.
Jesus didn't change. He changed the water into wine. He didn't change it into more water. So
exactly. And so, I mean, what's going on? It's like there's some sort of I don't know if it's a trigger that goes on in our spirit or something in our brain or something in both.
I think it's both, Doug.
Yeah.
I think it's both because, our bodies produce a certain amount of DMT naturally. And that clearly that's by design, but if you take a plant derivative, whatever the source may be of DMT, you generally have to take a concoction before, because your stomach makes an enzyme that suppresses it. Right. And so, again, this goes back to, intentionality and trajectory and what the purpose, is behind it. Is it, if DMT plays some sort of chemical, neurospiritual, however you want to call it, role in our existence, then God has already put the right amount in our bodies. But you've got these shamanic, and in some cases really neo-shamanic traditions that are using larger amounts of it, and you've got to, you actually have to take this stuff before, so that your body will actually absorb the extra amounts. So it's again, just as with all spellcraft, it's about intentionality, and we're certainly not looking at two things that are necessarily mutually exclusive here: the spiritual and the biological. They seem to be working in tandem in these cases, particularly in the negative, portal opening aspects of these activities.
It's interesting if you listen to like a Graham Hancock who talks about going on these ayahuasca trips, and we were talking ahead of time, about ayahuasca is becoming like this party, this event that you just do, right? Everybody's doing it, and he's like, I highly recommend everybody needs to do this, and it'll change your life, and all these things about it. And then he gets really almost angry at anybody who would dare say, how dare you do something like that? I just find his reactions to it just so interesting, and so kind of almost at the heart of what I think is the very reason why God forbade it in the first place.
Yeah. What was really fascinating to me in talking to Dr. Rick Strassman about his book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, was what appeared to be in his studies at New Mexico, of people who said that they saw the same things at the same time. In other words, volunteers who were given they had intravenous doses of DMT, so they could control the dosage and make it a scientific experiment. Look, mass hallucination is not a thing. You don't get multiple people who see, just hallucinate and imagine the same thing at the same time. So his conclusion was what was probably happening was these people were seeing things that were there, but just not perceptible to or by the people around them, the people who were not on the DMT. Later, he wrote a book called DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, a new science of spiritual revelation in the Hebrew Bible. And I wanted to interview him about that. He wasn't feeling well. He was having some health issues at the time, so we didn't. We never reconnected. And now he's going on Joe Rogan's show, so he's not going to want to do this podcast anymore. But
you never know.
And Rogan. Yeah, well, and Rogan's a little more open to the idea. I mean, I gave him a friendly forum. I wasn't challenging him on it, but I was just concerned that his conclusion, because many of the witnesses or participants, the volunteers in the study, said that the entities that they encountered were at best ambivalent to their presence and other times openly hostile.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were physically assaulted in that realm. And that's consistent with things I've heard from people who practiced astral projection, like our friend Josh Peck, or the co-author of his book, Second Coming in the New Age, Stephen Bankars. They would successfully leave their body and enter this realm, and suddenly there were these demonic type creatures that were not happy that these humans had intruded on their realm. But now I've also talked with a I'm gonna, unless he's changed since the last time we spoke, so, and it's been more than 10 years since I talked with him. It's Peter Levenda, who is an excellent researcher, gifted writer. Highly recommend his 3-book trilogy, Sinister Forces. But he argued that with proper preparation and prayer, you purify yourself, you can enter that realm without risk, which as a Christian, I just go back to God's warning to Moses and the Israelites, and I look at the results from Dr. Strassman's study and say, boy, it sure doesn't seem like that to me. I mean, I don't know how you can properly prepare yourself to go into a realm that we are not designed to perceive normally. Now, what really struck me when Dr. Strassman released that second book on his thesis in the book was we needed to do more research with DMT to figure out how the Hebrew prophets managed to get information from the spirit realm that proved so uncannily accurate. It's like, yeah, I can answer that question. Yeah. God revealed it to them.
God revealed it. That's all right.
They didn't force their way into the spirit realm. He pulled them in. He opened the door for them with a guide, usually an angelic guide, who probably was there as much for protection from these other things that are in that realm as anything else. But that was his conclusion after his research. Like, wait a minute, you saw what these people were. I mean, there was one guy who said he was sexually assaulted by a reptilian type creature in this realm. And there are a lot of anecdotal accounts from people who've done DMT on their own who said it was the most horrifying thing that they've. Now there are others who love it. The ayahuasca trips are a thing. It's a whole, cottage industry because there are some people who believe it's revealing secret wisdom to them. But man, I don't know what it is about that particular molecule and about the pineal gland. Maybe God put it there because originally in the garden, Adam and Eve were, supposed to perceive more dimensions. I know Chuck Missler had a teaching that he believed that we were originally able to perceive 11 dimensions. And he argued that with Maimonides, one of the medieval rabbis, who's still considered one of the greatest rabbis in Jewish thought to this day, I guess reached the same conclusion from the Torah. But God put a stop to that. I mean, that might have been part of getting kicked out of Eden, was the losing the ability to perceive those additional dimensions. So I just have to believe that there are a lot of people out there who are opening themselves up, and maybe we can use this to transition into technology, not just through drugs, but through other technological means, maybe just through opening themselves up to ideas they shouldn't be perceiving through the wrong kind of entertainment, whether it's film, television, or video game or whatever. But also, augmented reality, virtual reality. I mean, there was a story that came out a few years ago that was really weird about a Russian woman who claimed that she was sexually assaulted by a Pokemon character while she was playing Pokemon Go. And, everybody was like, oh, yeah, she's crazy. Well, yeah, maybe. But, maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, this was the discussion that I think that we kind of went this direction right after our last show. And then when we were done with a half-hour conversation, we said, well, we should have taped that. We should have kept taping, but we didn't do it. Mm-hmm. I think it was kind of my original concern is that there's more portals out there than I think people realize. Mm-hmm. When we talk about technology, at least as far as I'm concerned, I'm not talking about moving from a hand plow to a plow that you can attach to the back of an oxen, something like that. I'm talking about technology that plugs in to something that we call electricity and that uses usually light, although it doesn't have to be light. You can think of the radio does the same thing and it's using audio waves or whatever. But I especially think of the whole idea of electricity and light. And I just wonder about not the physics of it, like that's interesting. You can take that in your 12th grade physics class, but I wonder about the metaphysics of it. And the reason I say that is because when you think about the way that the Bible presents both God and angels, these are creatures of light. That's what they are. And when you start messing around with light, it's like, it's different to light a fire in your fireplace or in your back, out in a camp with a wooden pit or something like that, versus to harness that fire in a little, luminescent light bulb, but then you take that light bulb and you plug it into some other electronic source that gives you the fire. I just think that's so interesting. And it's like, what are we doing? And the other thing, it's not just light, it's the actual power, it's the power, the energy itself. Because when you think about what these creatures are, if they're living in another realm, what kind of a realm is it? Is it a realm of energy? Is it a realm of power? I mean, the Jews, they spoke about the powers of God. And Paul talks about the powers of heaven. What exactly are these things? And so when I think about technology, that's the first thing that I think about when we're talking about this discussion of portals. It's not mechanical. It's not a typewriter. It's a keyboard. Those are different things. A typewriter is taking a physical, mechanical thing and slapping some ink onto a piece of paper. It's all physical. A keyboard is doing that all electronically through light and through binary ups and downs on computer chips. And it's like, what is this? What are we dealing with here? And I think that if we were to go on into a deep dive of the origins of some of these technologies, that we would probably be absolutely aghast at where they come from. I can only speak anecdotally to one thing that some friends of mine told me. They were reading a book. They couldn't trace it down. They were talking about how the guy who invented the Xerox machine invented that because he had a vision. And that's what it was. It was a vision that he felt like came from another source somewhere else. And next thing you know, you've got the Xerox machine. And it's like, what is that? So my point is, what are we doing when we plug into electronics, when we shoot light beams into our face? Are we, we call it the World Wide Web. We call it the information superhighway. Is it possible that we're maybe traveling down a highway that is actually in enemy territory? That it's not that the highway itself is good or bad or anything like that, but it's that it belongs in another realm, and it's like you're driving down a road in Afghanistan under a heavy war, and you don't know what's waiting on that highway for you. You know what I mean? So this is some of the questions that I wonder. Is the very idea of these light technologies, these energy technologies, are they portals in and of themselves, whether we do anything with them to cross over or not? By their very existence, are they portals? That's the question I wonder.
I think I think if I could speak to that, I think quantum technologies are right on the threshold of that sort of thing, because we're at the point now where we have, not widely available, but it's certainly in existence, quantum computing, which literally dumps its computing questions into other dimensions to derive the answers. I mean, it takes inordinate amounts of energy power to do that. You've got to cool it because of the high temperatures involved. And so, I think Doug's right. I think that, the powers or these forces that exist in our realm probably have analogs and exponential, myriads of kinds of forces in other dimensions. It's just that they can be used for good. They were set up there by God, but somehow these unseen forces, these fallen Elohim, if we want to use a general term, have the knowledge to be able to weaponize that to some extent. And it may not just be, light. It could be something like inertia or gravity, because we know, like from Einstein's work, that, we thought we had kind of a handle on gravity. And here comes Einstein and he says, well, it's still this undefinable thing, and it bends light and affects time. And there are all these things that we have a language that we're trying to understand to apply to, we call it science, but there is this vast undiscovered country in these other dimensions, and we just don't know what we don't know. But what we can see from our end is that we are developing these, using Doug's definition of technology, we are developing these technologies and modalities that bring us right to the cusp of it, to where just like the anthropologists began to say in the last century, there's really no difference between magic and science. It's just this bifurcation that we draw on a spectrum.
Yeah, as Arthur C. Clarke famously said, any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic.
Exactly.
We had an email after last month's program, or actually a comment on the YouTube video, saying, I was disappointed that you didn't talk about CERN and the Large Hadron Collider. And so I was able to say, well, that's okay, because we'll get it next month. Because that is right on the website. I'm looking at the homepage at CERN's website. They are actively trying to detect and make contact with extra dimensions, additional dimensions, and for what purpose? Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to what that might be. I mean, we can wonder as to why they put the statue of Shiva, the god of death, there in front of CERN, and there's if I remember correctly, it was built on the site of a temple of Apollo. So okay. Whether that has any relevance or not, I don't know. I think intentionality is what it comes down to. I suspect most of the scientists working at CERN on the LHC and other colliders around the world. I mean, there's a Fermi collider just outside Chicago that's been operating for a long time. It's nowhere near as big as CERN's, but there are other plans out there. The Chinese want to build one that's even bigger than CERN. What are they trying to accomplish? What are they trying to make contact with? Are they trying to open a portal to another dimension? Yeah, maybe. And it may be that they just think it would be really cool to finally prove that there were 11 dimensions or whatever. I don't know that they're going down to the bowels of the Large Hadron Collider wearing hooded black robes. And, but for all I know, they could be. I honestly don't know. The one thing I take comfort in is that I don't think they're going to open a portal to anything that God doesn't allow. And so
this is true.
Apollyon,
this is true.
the destroyer, is not going to come out. We are not going to skip suddenly to Revelation chapter 9 and the fifth trumpet. Yeah, there's I know there's arguments on the timing of what happens in the end times, but I can say without fear of contradiction, we're not going to go from 0 to fifth trumpet in when the next time they flip on the Large Hadron Collider. Personally, I think it'd be kind of cool if they could prove the existence of additional dimensions, because from a Christian perspective, it's like, hey, you're speaking our language now.
Right.
I mean, my guess is that when you've got that many people involved in something, that you've got all kinds of different motives going on. You probably have some dark and black magic. You probably have some people that are just really interested in the science. And you probably have stuff that's all over the board in between it. And so to take one or the other of those and just kind of make it, well, that's what they're doing, it doesn't seem to me to do justice to the totality of what's behind it. It's the same thing with like a nuclear bomb. I don't remember if we talked about this during the show or after, but I've wondered, and I'm not the only one who's wondered this, if maybe playing around with the atom and splitting it, what does that do metaphysically? Like, are you opening a portal? And, it's not out of the realm of my mind to think that some people thought maybe that's exactly what it was doing. But at the same time, there were certainly other people who thought, no, we just want to win a war. So it's not like you have to choose one or the other when it comes to this sort of a thing. It's much more complicated than that. But if there are portals, that doesn't, just because somebody has maybe a better purpose for it, like we want to win a war and stop a war, let's say, take the high road or whatever. If it is opening a portal, it doesn't matter what you think, it still is doing that. And that's the thing that concerns me. Same thing with technology. You can use it for all the good you want to use it for, but if it is a portal, it's a portal. And if you're not willing to deal with that, then there's a problem.
Yeah. I will say this. I remember, Mike Heiser used to talk about the Babylon working, which was Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard doing sex rituals out in the desert to try to bring forth the whore of Babylon. And they thought they succeeded. Aleister Crowley was very upset. It was toward the end of his life there, but he thought Crowley or Parsons and Hubbard were idiots and didn't know what forces they were messing with. And that was probably true. But as Mike... And there are those who believe that whatever they did, Parsons and Hubbard, kicked off the modern UFO phenomenon, because it was not long after that you had Roswell and then Aztec, Kenneth Arnold in the Pacific Northwest. That really began that period, the start of the modern UFO phenomenon. But, that was also the same time you had the United Nations created and Israel became an independent state again. And so there were a lot of things happening around 1947 and 48. Heiser's comment on Parsons and Hubbard was, look, if these entities that we're supposed to be so afraid of coming through had to wait for a couple of deviant losers, conducting perverted sex rituals in the desert to give them permission to come through, then they're pretty lame. It's like, okay, got a point there. The problem is,
I get that, but at the same time, what if they don't have the ability to come through unless somebody on this side opens the door? That's not to say that they're not powerful, because they could be incredibly powerful. And it's not to say that it's not to say anything one way or the other towards a couple of idiots that are doing crazy magic. But maybe they stumble onto something that, like Crowley said, that they didn't really understand what they were doing. To me, that's possible. Like I give that a little bit more credit, possibility than maybe Mike did. I don't know.
Well, and maybe, I'm sorry, Derek, go ahead.
I was going to say that a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Greg Reed, told me about something he heard from a fellow who's been a guest on this program a couple of times, Tony Cale, who's an expert on occult ritual abuse, and he has contacts who are embedded with certain covens that try to open portals. And I remember Greg telling us, it might have been the program that just got yanked off YouTube for, promoting harmful conspiracy theories, now that I think about it. Anyway, he said that what he was told by Tony was that his contacts were telling him that several years back, these occultists opened up a portal or gateway somewhere around the 2012 timeframe, and something really bad was coming through, and they didn't know how to stop it. So there may be something to it. My tendency is to think that the portal is, again, intentionality, what the person on this side chooses to do. And I think the fact that we're seeing the world going the direction it is, that there are more people giving permission to these entities to enter into them and use them.
Yeah, that's kind of the direction that I was going. The covenant a covenant seems to be at work here too, and that's part of ritual magic as well. And to Doug's point about, maybe they need those whatever we want to call supernatural useful idiots or whatever. Maybe they need people like Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, for those sort of covenantal crossings of the threshold, so to speak. And that is very much a modality that's executed by demons on a regular basis. So at least in terms of, statistics, law of averages, that seems to be something that's at play in all of this.
The other aspect
you
of
told
technology,
me you had something about you told me you had something about vampires that you wanted to bring into this, and I'm super curious as to what that was going to be.
Well, it's not strictly technological. It speaks more toward, but it does speak to what we started off with today, about the these pits, these circular pits, and the using of them as mediums to contact these entities and as representations of the netherworld, whether it's the circular enclosures that Göbekli Tepe or the kivas that we find in, Chaco and Anasazi culture. They all seem to have a very similar, sort of purpose and function. A few months back, I did just sort of a thought experiment, and because Derek and I had a conversation about the Avi, the necromantic ritual pits at a pit at Urkesh, and I think we were talking about the ones at Göbekli Tepe as well, just in general, that region of Turkey. But I started to wonder, because I was already thinking linguistically anyway about, Rava and Refa and the links between those two words, and their relation to words for kings. And so I was sort of already thinking about that, but the Avi made me think of not just what we know about its connections, for potential connections with words like O in Hebrew and the Apsu in Mesopotamian dialects, but there was something about words that were used for vampire throughout the Transcaucasus, through Turkey and the Slavic regions of Europe, and it's usually some variation of Upir or Opir or Upiri. These are all Slavic, in some cases Turkish, in some cases much older words used for this vampire or vampire-like creature. And part of the tradition of the vampire is that there has to be an invitation there. That's not just pop culture. It does exist, and particularly in the Slavic versions of the vampire. And of course, those lands butt up to the Transcaucasus and Turkey, Anatolia. So even that idea, the idea of the vampire, seems to be linguistically anchored in these older ideas and older words for these necromantic ritual pits and, these ancient religious specialists that provided, these links between the physical world and the netherworld, or supposedly the netherworld. That was really the commentary that I had. I wish I thought about that at the beginning of the discussion, but we seem to have circled back from technology all the way back to that. But I thought it was, again, it's an idea that's rattling around that I'd really kind of like to develop at some point in time. But the little map that I made of these words and their proximity and the dating of their occurrences does seem to line up, because of particularly because of that initial vowel consonant morpheme that you see shared between words like Ob and Avi and Opir.
Yeah. And again, you got that paper by Harry Hofter from 1966, before they found the Avi at Urkesh, arguing that that was the original from which we get the Sumerian Apsu and the Akkadian Abzu. You get that BP switch. So, and again, over time, as that word changes, Abi, Apsu, Abzu, Ov, you could very easily see it going in the other direction as the word spread north, Upir.
Right. Yeah,
and the
they're
idea
all
that you had to summon.
yeah, they're all related. That's
Summon it.
the bilabial hard sound and then the soft sounds. Yeah.
And you would summon, according to the Hittite records of the ancient Hurrian practice, it was a blood offering of some sort, a piglet or a puppy or a lamb that was sacrificed in the pit. But then at the end of the ritual, then the pit, these entities would be sent back to the netherworld, and the hole would be covered with loaves of bread or dirt or a straw mat or something, almost like putting a manhole cover back in place, to contain it under. And Sharon pointed this out because I was telling her about our conversation as we're working on a book called The Gates of Hell, and so I'm bringing all of the Hurrian stuff in, and the Hebrew Ov, the Ov of Endor who summoned the spirit of Samuel unknowingly, unwittingly. She pointed out that when Jacob was getting ready to move from Shechem to Bethel. This was after the rape of Dinah, Genesis chapter 34. He said, "Okay, you've made me a stench in the nostrils of my neighbors, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. So we're going to move to Bethel, but we're all going to purify ourselves first. So let's collect all your household gods, all the household idols and earrings." And then he buried them at the Oak of Moreh. Now, the text says the terebinth that is near Shechem, but it's the terebinth, not a terebinth. It was clearly a sacred tree, probably the same one where when Abraham first arrived in Canaan, that's where Yahweh appeared to him and said, okay, this land will belong to your descendants. So it's possible that Jacob, who had not yet been taught all of the things about the spirit realm that was later revealed to Moses and the prophets, thought, okay, we're going to have to, devote ourselves just to Yahweh so he can protect us now because we've caused a stink here by slaughtering all the male population of Shechem. They buried all of it's like, okay, we're going to send all of these other gods that have been worshipped by the people I brought with me from Haran. We're going to send them back to the netherworld. And when you go back 3, 4, 5,000 years, this idea of creating a magic circle or digging a big ritual pit, in a sense, that was technology.
Well, and it speaks to that, what Malinowski, and the other anthropologists were saying in the early 20th century about the interchangeability or the just the same spectrum that magic and science are on. So in a way, it is technology.
You bringing that up reminds me of a theory that I have, which is about idols and the stuff out of which they made their idols. So they usually made them out of stone or wood. And why I find that so interesting is because those are the two elements that the gods are most closely associated with. For example, God is called the rock or the stone. Jesus is the stone of stumbling. Jesus is the branch of Jesse, the vine, the tree. The gods are called the trees of Eden, the world tree. In Moses' song, he calls the gods the rock of the people. Is our rock there? Is your rock our rock? That sort of thing. I just find it really weird. And you just reminded me of it, Derek, that is a kind of technology. If you're using something that is associated with these entities, whether it's light or stone or wood, and you're using that as a means of communication or harnessing or whatever else that they do with the gods and the idols, then that's exactly what we're talking about. An idol, technically speaking, isn't in one sense it is, Paul talks about you can make your stomach an idol or something like that. But we usually think of idols as, it's your celebrities, it's your sporting events, it's you want to go to the store and buy all these clothes. No, technically that's not really what an idol is. An idol is where you want to harness a literal deity on the other side and bring it into some kind of a thing like a piece of stone or wood, so that you can have some kind of power over it, so that it can do something for you in a way that you're not going to be destroyed. That's exactly the idea of a portal that I think that I had in mind with technology. And all you've done is go back to the older days and basically shown that it's the same kind of an idea, but just using different material.
It is, and we're using
and
the same materials. I mean, just look
yes,
look at
we are.
look at your cell phone. I mean,
Crystal.
there's some
Yeah.
synthetic parts to it, but yeah, it's crystal, it's silica, it's copper, it's lithium. It's all rocks and minerals.
It sure is.
Wow. And that's exactly when you read the intentions of the writings of Helena Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley. That's exactly what they were trying to do. They were trying to come up with a scientific way of manipulating the spirits in the unseen realm. Well, yeah, this is fascinating. It's interesting to know about, just to understand what those who are opposed to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and his Messiah, the angel of Yahweh, Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, those who are opposed to the one who spoke everything into existence and has laid out a plan of salvation for all of us fallen mortals, how they are trying to circumvent his will. And again, this stuff can be really frightening when you look at what they're trying to do and the kind of people and the power wielded by some of the people who do these things. But as Psalm 2 said, the nations rage and imagine a vain thing, but he who sits in the heavens laughs. He holds them in derision. They're not going to accomplish anything that he doesn't give them enough rope to do. And ultimately, his will is going to be accomplished regardless of what they do, and all of their rituals and all of their apparent success. I mean, we can look at, as the Super Bowl is coming up with the halftime program, maybe we talk about that and we deconstruct the halftime show in the next program.
We could do that.
Yeah.
Derek, I have a couple of kind of pastoral things that I'd like to say to people about this subject. The first one is, and I believe we were talking about this after our last show, so I don't think we said it last time, but I was bringing up the idea of a tool. So technology is a tool. And when you think about any tool, like think about a hammer. If all of a sudden you get enlisted to build a house for Habitat for Humanity and you haven't picked up a hammer in a year and a half, and you go and you start hammering all day, you're using a tool. But the thing is, what you'll come to realize at the end of the day is that the tool is also using you, whether you like it or not. And you will know that because you have a giant blister on your hand at the end of that day that will really hurt. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things people don't realize about technology, they just think, well, it's not evil technology. Well, that's not really the point. Technology isn't good, bad, or neutral. It does some things well, it does other things poorly, and it doesn't do anything neutrally. And you can use the technology, but you have to understand, by definition, the technology will use you too. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think we all see this, especially the older generations, when we see kids, we used to do this with TV. We used to say it with TV, you see how a little kid's eyes just automatically go up to the TV if they've never seen one before. Well, we're seeing this on steroids now with telephones that these little kids have, that they cannot take their eyes away from the telephone. And all I want to say about that is that you have to understand that you're being used by that as much as you think you are using it. It's doing something to you. Mm-hmm. And I think parents need to be aware of this for themselves, because I don't know, a lot of adults are aware of it. And then they also need to be aware of it for their children's sake. And especially if we're dealing with things that belong, properly speaking, to another realm, and we're traveling on a foreign highway or something, like I said earlier. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that this discussion earlier today really brought to my mind something that Martin Luther talked an awful lot about as he was starting the Reformation. And he was dealing with the subject of really salvation. But I think that it's very appropriate here. He talked about the way that the people naturally of their own nature have different ways that they want to reach up to God and be saved. And, the most obvious one from a Protestant perspective is the idea of merit, that we do this of our own merit. And so our good works. But he also talked about the idea of moralism and of mysticism and speculation. And I think it's really interesting because, from a Reformed Lutheran background that I kind of come out of as a pastor, one of the things that we emphasize a lot to people is the idea of the common, ordinary means of grace, the preaching of the word, the regular attendance of church, the administration of the Lord's Supper, the regular fellowship one-on-one, not as we're doing here, which is fine. It has its own neat things that we can do. But I mean, embodied, physical, right there in your face fellowship, praying with one another. These are ordinary, common things that I really honestly believe God gave them to us for a couple of reasons. One reason is so that is because he knows that this is what we need. We need on a daily basis. We know this as families. You need to eat with your family every night. Eat a meal with your family every night. You need that. But he also did it, I think, to kind of test us, because he knows that they get really boring to us, and we don't like boring, especially as 21st century people in America. What we like is excitement, and this is not exciting to do this ordinary, common stuff every single week. But that is what Luther said. That is where the power is. And when you understand with the eyes of faith that that's where the power is, then suddenly you can step back from what is actual power, the technology that we've been talking about, the ability to go to the other side, and you can kind of analyze it a little bit more objectively and say, God's given me everything that I need already, so I can use this. I can use it for good. I can understand that it uses me, but man, I really need to beware of my own heart and the propensity that I have to leave those common, ordinary means of grace and try and find my identity, my self-worth, even my merit standing before God through these kinds of things that I'm using. And I really think that people need to hear that message.
Yep.
I absolutely agree, because we hear a lot from people who are finding it difficult to get their sense of worth. And I think it's because we are so bombarded by these portals, these screens that take us into these other realms, and shown an artificial reality that says, you're really not important, especially when you're a kid. I just sent an email to a young man earlier today, and I said, when I was in elementary school, I was like, the fat kid with glasses who was too smart for, teacher's pet. I'm thankful that social media was not around 50 years ago, because school would have been even more unbearable than it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but our kids today are having their lives and their psyches and their spirits warped out of true by the social media toxic miasma that they're soaking in. And I think as parents, you're right. I think there's an element of normality and boringness that we need to instill. We need this analog existence where we're actually talking to one another. Hey, schools, take away the phones when the kids come in the door. Make the kids talk to each other again. Stuff like that. So, Doug, that's a really good word. I'm glad you brought it in.
All the things that both of you have just said are crystallized in the very word that Jesus gave us for the church: ecclesia, assembly, fellowship, brotherhood. We're supposed to do that.
It's hard to fellowship when we're all sitting in a circle, but we're all staring at a screen.
Yeah, right.
It's funny, and it can come across as hypocritical, because of course we're saying these things using technology as we're on, Riverside app and all this kind of stuff. And I just bring that up as a funny way to say that we're not against technology,
right?
But it's something that we need to be thinking more intentionally about. What is it we're participating in? Are we engaging in things that we don't even understand? Is that something that we should at least think about? At least maybe talk to somebody else about, have a conversation. And what would happen in the church if we did that kind of thing? If we started having conversations about this kind of a thing?
Yes.
I think that it could be really good.
Oh.
And you can find the conversation on our YouTube channel.
Exactly. So go like that like button.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Click subscribe.
Ser- but seriously though, for people, I would recommend a book that I just interviewed the author about maybe 6 weeks ago, Nick Goss, Goss, and a book called Unplugging Babylon, or Unplugging Babel, excuse me, which is all about this very topic. And don't try to get it for your Kindle because he deliberately made it only available in paperback form.
Good,
You can
good
find
for
it.
him.
Yeah. He made an exception for me. He sent me a PDF, but
Yeah, exactly.
So go back into the archives, Nick Goss, and you can find him there in that book. Doug Van Dorn is the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder. His website, douglasvandorn.com. Dr. Judd Burton, director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, online, burtonbeyond.net. And two of our guests for next spring's Iron and Myth Tour of Israel. Dates on that at our website, vftb.net, gilberthouse.org. You can also find it on our app, and we're looking forward to that and praying for the peace of Jerusalem in the meanwhile. And fellows, look forward to talking with you again next month. Check the show notes below this program, whether you are watching or listening, for the links to the websites for Doug Van Dorn and Judd Burton. Also, Brian Godawa, even though he was not with us this month, we will look forward to his return next month, and another fascinating topic on our monthly Iron and Myth series. Coming up, did you know that love of reading and writing, love of English literature, is in fact white supremacy? Yeah, bless their pointy little heads. Also, details on our solidarity mission to Israel coming up in May, how you can join us to bear witness to what has happened in Israel since October 7th, and more. Where you will find Sharon and me through the rest of the year. That and more as A View from the Bunker continues straight ahead. It's a new month, and we have a new special at the Gilbert House online store.
We have a crazy, crazy deal on all of our DVDs. They are, regardless of the retail price, they are 75% off.
We keep hearing from the kids these days that everything is going to streaming video, that DVDs are old school.
Oh, not for us.
No, we are old school. And besides, we don't trust the internet will always be there. So take advantage of this special offer. Everything from our travel documentaries. Basically follow us as we go through the Holy Land and show you the important sites at ground zero on this supernatural war, plus video teachings, presentations, and much, much more.
You know, with 75% off savings on all the DVDs, as many as you want to get, you've got the money that you saved to go out and buy a DVD player.
That's it. Take advantage of it now, online only at the Gilbert House store, gilberthouse.org/store. And thank you for your prayers and support. Walking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online, vftb.net. That is the main website for this program, but our web hub, of course, is gilberthouse.org. That's where everything that Sharon and I do together. gilberthouse.org. You can also find me at derekpgilbert.com. Online at social media, Twitter at View from Bunker. X, formerly Twitter, at Derek Gilbert. First name spelled D-E-R-E-K. By the way, use as few letters as you can and still make the name, and then you've got it right. Truth Social, Gab Me, we get her at Derek P. Gilbert, Threads at Derek Gilbert, and on YouTube, our website, or rather our video channel at Gilbert House on YouTube. If you're watching there, God bless you. Subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and then please download our free mobile app to guarantee that we never get canceled. The app is hosted, the content hosted, by a Christian company. They've got no desire to cancel us, to censor us, which is not necessarily the case with some of these other video sharing sites. So please protect yourself, practice safe web, and download our free mobile app, gilberthouse.org/app. There's also a link at vftb.net. You'll find a link in the top menu bar there. It's available for iOS, Android, and Amazon Kindle Fire phones and tablets. Beyond getting access to all of our content, our weekly Bible study, Unraveling Revelation, our Old our original podcast, PID Radio. We're the OP, the original podcast. PID Radio going back to 2005. There is a groups session, a messaging section where you can communicate, share prayer requests, pray for one another, ask questions of Sharon and me directly, and more. Again, you'll find it at gilberthouse.org/app. Well, the pollen here beginning to kick up in the Ozarks as temperatures have warmed just a little bit. They're kind of wandering back and forth. Turns out the juniper trees that we've got all around us here in the Ozarks just send out just an incredible amount of pollen, even in the winter months, which would explain the condition of my allergies, the state of my allergies over the last 9 years. It seemed like we get into the winter months and suddenly my asthma would get worse. And apparently it's juniper pollen. Anyway, it's hardly a month goes by without something getting even more ridiculous in the way of critical theory, critical race theory, but critical theory in general, which is the idea that there's always an oppressor class, an oppressed class. It has been taken from the Marxist definition of economic classes, the proletariats and the bourgeoisie. Now it is based on skin color. So we are seeing this manifest now in academia and trickling down into our high schools and junior high schools, where we find more evidence of this coming from Seattle, not surprisingly, a very liberal city here in the United States, where students in an English class at a Seattle high school were told that their love of reading and writing was a characteristic of white supremacy. White supremacy. Some of the parents are pushing back against this. This is at Lincoln High School in Seattle. One of the fathers of a student there said this is educational malpractice. But this was taught to students as part of Black Lives Matter at School Week. The World Literature and Composition classes at Lincoln High School given a handout with definitions of the 9 characteristics of white supremacy, and one of them was love of reading and writing. The worksheet that they were given, students were given, labels things like objectivity, individualism, and perfectionism as other examples of white supremacy. This is, it is just incoherent thought, but that is the whole point. The logical conclusion of critical theory, and not even critical race theory, just critical theory, is that if the oppressed class, whatever it is, economically or racially oppressed, rises up and throws off the oppressor, under the definition, the worldview of critical theory, they then become, by definition, the oppressors. And so the former oppressors who are now the oppressed must then turn around and rise up and throw off their chains, which results in just chaos, constant warfare. And that is the point. Chaos rising is the entire point of critical theory. It is literally an anti-Christian doctrine, not anti-Christian in the sense that it's against Christians, but anti-Christ doctrine. Because as we are told in the New Testament, Christ created all things. Through him, all things were made, and through him, in him, all things hold together, which means order. So chaos is about as anti-Christ as you can get, which is why we believe the spirit that inhabits the human, who will one day be known as the Antichrist, is the spirit of chaos. In other words, Leviathan. And sadly, that is what is being taught to our students. Again, the most recent example coming to our attention from Lincoln High School in Seattle, Washington, where we say to the educators there, bless your pointy little heads. We've got a lot coming up this year. The Skywatch TV virtual conference, just a couple of weeks away, less than 2 weeks away now, launches on the 29th of February. I've contributed my presentation, Hamas, Molech, and Armageddon. Sharon's talk is titled Opening the Gates of Hell. And we get into some of this discussion of chaos generally, not this topic specifically that I just discussed, but it is, I think, very timely. And of course, Skywatch TV is featuring as part of this presentation or part of this virtual conference, the last presentation recorded by Tom Horn. He recorded it last fall before he became ill. You can still sign up at defenderconference.com. You get 90 days access to 24 presentations: Carl Gallups, Judd Burton, Rabbi Zev Porat, Kenny C., Casper McLeod, Dr. Mike Spalding, Dr. Igal German, Vicky Joy Anderson, and more. And even if you sign up after the 29th of February, but why wait? You still get 90 days access. 90 days access to all of those presentations, plus all 6 feature-length documentaries from Skywatch Films. DefenderConference.com is where you go to sign up. DefenderConference.com. Joined out here in the barn by Grace, the rescue dog, who's now joined, by the way, by a little sister, another rescue dog that we just took in last night. We're calling her Glory. She appears to be a border collie mix of some kind, either border collie, Labrador, maybe some pit in there as well. But anyway, she's maybe 10 weeks old, so she's got some growing to do, which means Grace has some time to perfect her moves, before Glory catches up to her. Anyway, in Dallas, April 5th through 8th at the Prophetic Signs in the Heavenlies Conference from Hear the Watchmen. This is at the Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center in Grapevine, close to the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. We'll be there with Colonel David Giamona, Paul Begley, David Hebner, Pastor Casper McLeod, Dr. Kerry Mayday, Dave Hodges, Michael Boldea, Tuv Rose, John Moore, David Paxton, Doug Thornton. Great lineup and a great gathering for what will be a very interesting weekend, because that's on that Monday, April 8th, is the total eclipse of the sun. So we're sticking around through Tuesday morning, actually, so we can watch the total eclipse from the security of the airport. Back 7 years ago, when it came across the U.S., Here the Watchman had a conference in Boise, Idaho, and we had to drive a couple of hours north to see the eclipse. Spectacular. And we're praying that the weather is good that day so that we'll be able to see it again. But you can join us, and we encourage you to do so. Find out more and register today at hearthewatchmen.com, hearthewatchmen.com. Early May, we are going to Israel for a week. This is what we're calling our solidarity mission to Israel. Our solidarity mission to Israel. May 6th, leave the United States, arrive in Tel Aviv May 7th, depart on May 13th. And in between, we will visit some communities in the south that were attacked on October 7th, including Sderot, the town in the Negev where the police station was besieged, a couple of the kibbutzim down there as well. In Tel Aviv, we'll visit Hostage Square, where families are keeping vigil for the 130-odd that are still not returned to their families, still being held, presumably, in Gaza. We'll also visit sites in Jerusalem. Those sites are still open, including the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, the Mount of Olives, ground zero in not just the historical war, but in what will be the Battle of Armageddon, which will end when Messiah lands on the Mount of Olives and it splits in two. That and more, and you can get more information at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel, gilberthouse.org/travel. The website, gilbertsinisrael.com, should be updated this coming week with registration information. But here are the details. This 7-day tour, all accommodations for 7 nights at a 4-star hotel in Jerusalem, which is secure. The ground package, land package, $1,950 US. Now that includes accommodations, morning and evening meals, so breakfast and dinner. Lunch is on your own. Does not include the airfare to and from Tel Aviv. Also tips for the drivers and guides and so forth. But $1,950 US for the land package. Again, 7 days to Israel. We plan to go, bear witness, pray at these locations. One of the days there, where we're down in the south in the Negev, we plan to have a barbecue with some IDF soldiers and just show our support, that we as Christians support Israel, and we ask that you join us. This will be a small group. We're looking to take 20 to 30 people at most. And again, if you want more information, gilberthouse.org/travel, but gilbertsinisrael.com will be the place to sign up. In June, we'll be at His Call Ministries in Sparta, Missouri. That's between Springfield and Branson. The Finley River Ranch, June 21st through 23rd. In July 26th and 27th, the Go Therefore Conference at the Harvest Revival Center in Brookville. That's suburban Dayton, Ohio. Dr. Michael Lake, Ellie Marzulli, Pastor Carl Gallups, Dr. Judd Burton, Dr. Greg Reed. Join us there for this one. This will be a wonderful gathering. These conferences, the Go Therefore conferences, get better and better every year. In late October, we are planning on being in Scotland for the Nephilim Anthropology Conference. Details on that, specifics still forthcoming, but we will get those to you as soon as we can. But we hope to see you then in our 2024 Israel tour, which had been backed up to November. We are now just pushing that back and rolling it into our 2025 tour, which includes Doug Van Dorn and Dr. Judd Burton. We're hoping to hear from Timothy Alberino that he can join us as well, seeing as how his scheduled tours have been pushed back out of 2024 due to circumstances beyond anyone's control, really. And you'll find all this information on our app. Just go to the calendar section and look it up, or go to gilberthouse.org just gilberthouse.org and look for the calendar link in the top menu bar. Thank you for joining us today and giving us an hour or so of your time. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen. You can subscribe to us at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Odyssey, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer, the inimitable D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.